Tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern over on Jaguar Gator 8, a new college football video drops. In this video, we'll talk about Saturday's game between Arizona State and Eastern Michigan, and a dumb decision that Herm Edwards made right before he got fired. And now, on with our feature presentation. Did anyone see this coming at all? I'm not talking about the Buffalo Bills being 2-0. They were projected by a lot of people, including myself, to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl, and even win the Super Bowl. They have arguably the most complete roster in football, a great coaching staff, a franchise quarterback that looks almost unstoppable at his peak, and was considered by many to be the favorite to win the MVP this year, and have had tons of success over the past few seasons. I'm talking about the Bills being 2-0 in the way that they are, not just by beating their first two opponents, but by utterly destroying them and making them contemplate whether or not they're any good. In Week 1, they went on the road to SoFi Stadium, took on the Los Angeles Rams, who were the defending Super Bowl champion, raising their banner, and on what was supposed to be a celebratory night, they put together one of the biggest blowouts in the history of opening night, winning 31-10 in a game where they didn't even play all that great, as they turned it over 4 times. But they still played really well. The Bills held the Rams to less than 3 yards per carry. Josh Allen completed 84% of his passes. The defensive line forced Matthew Stafford to get sacked 7 times, and the offense, when their backs were against the wall, knew how to get out of a sticky situation, converting a whopping 90% of their third down conversions. It was a near perfect start to the season for Buffalo. So how do you follow that up? Well, you host the Tennessee Titans on Monday Night Football in front of your home crowd, the team that got the number 1 seed in the AFC the year before, the team that you've lost in each of the last 2 years to, despite clearly being the better team on paper, 1 time in a blowout, and 1 time on a 4th down quarterback sneak, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And not only do you win that game, but you win in a demolition. The final score was 41-7, and honestly, the only reason it was that close was because the Bills took their foot off the gas late in the third quarter after jumping out to that lead and then putting in the backups. On a week where no lead was safe, with the Rams nearly blowing a 28-3 lead to the Falcons in a bizarre twist, the Ravens blowing a 21-point lead in the fourth quarter to the Dolphins, and the Browns blowing a 13-point lead with 2 minutes left to the Jets, the outcome in this one after that third quarter massacre was never in doubt. Josh Allen threw 4 touchdown passes and no interceptions. The incredible Derrick Henry was held to 25 rushing yards on less than 2 yards per carry. Stephon Diggs looked like the best receiver in football with 12 catches for 148 yards and 3 touchdowns. And the pass defense played incredibly well, holding Ryan Tannehill to 117 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a passer rating of 32.7, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. In a matter of 12 game minutes, it went from 10-7 Bills to 41-7 Bills. Through 2 weeks, the Bills are clearly the best team in the NFL, leading the NFL with a point differential of plus 55 after 2 games, that on paper should have been close and should have given them reason to sweat. But what you might not realize is that it goes much deeper than that. Much, much deeper. Because I looked at every season in NFL history, and without any exaggeration, without any hint of hyperbole whatsoever, and without even a shred of recency bias, this is the greatest start to any season by any team in NFL history. In the post-merger era, there have been 1,573 seasons played by teams. And of those 1,573 seasons, the start to this season by the Bills is the greatest start of all time. And I have the stats to prove it. So let's take a deep dive into why that is. Because trust me, if you're a Bills fan, you've got to be feeling pretty good right about now. Now, the best way to determine just how dominant a team has been through the first 2 weeks is through point differential. Plenty of teams have started 2-0, but not a whole lot have started in the manner that the Bills have, where they had a point differential of plus 55. That means that, on average, you've beaten your opponent by more than 27 points a game. You've beaten each of your first 2 opponents, on average, by 4 touchdowns. While this point differential is incredibly impressive, the Bills are far from the first team in the post-merger era to have a point differential this high after 2 weeks. In fact, this isn't even the highest point differential through 2 weeks in Bills history, as they did better in 1981. But this doesn't mean that the Bills aren't an exclusive company. The Bills are just the 14th team in the post-merger era, from 1970 on, to have a point differential this high after 2 weeks and a 2-0 record. But even though the point differential isn't the highest, when we talk about the quality of the opponents that they faced, not only are the Bills the clear winners, but quite frankly, it's not even close, to the point where the gap between their competition and the other 13 teams on the list is like the gap between Secretariat and the second-place horse at Belmont in 1973. You're going to want to stick around to the end to see just how dominant it truly is. We're going to go in ascending order of the opponents and their combined record from the year before, since usually, the way you evaluate opponents at the start of a new season is based on how good they were the previous year, with some exceptions if a team experienced a ton of roster turnover. At the very bottom, you have Washington in 1975, who got off to a great 2-0 start by beating the New Orleans Saints 41-3 and the New York Giants 49-13, giving them a point differential of plus 74. The bad news? Both the Giants and the Saints absolutely stunk the year before. The Saints were 5-9, and the Giants were the worst team in football, sitting dead last with a 2-12 record. That comes out to a combined record of 7-21, which is a winning percentage of 25%. And don't worry, at the very end, I'll show a graph with all of these numbers and stats plotted out, so you can truly get an idea of just how dominant the Bills have been in 2022 by comparison. Tied with 1975 Washington is 2006 San Diego, who had a point differential of plus 60 after shutting out the Raiders 27-0 and the Titans 40-7. However, both the Raiders and Titans were god-awful in 2005. They both went 4-12, so when you add those records up, you get an 8-24 combined record and a winning percentage of 25%. That's the absolute bottom of the list in terms of combined winning percentage. Now let's work our way up. And I should note that every single team that had a point differential this good this early on wound up finishing the season with a record of at least 500 or better. Not that I think anyone was ever seriously considering the fact that the Bills would finish 8-9 or worse, but if you were crazy enough to think that, after this stat, you can get that insane thought out of your head. Continuing with this list, in 1998, the Seahawks had a point differential of plus 57 after beating the Eagles 38-0 and the Cardinals 33-14. The Eagles and the Cardinals were near the bottom of the NFC the year before. The Eagles went 6-9-1, and the Cardinals went 4-12, so that's a combined record of 10-21-1, and a combined winning percentage of 32.8%. Going back to that 1981 Bills team, their point differential was plus 63 after 2 weeks, as they beat the Jets 31-0, and then beat the Colts 35-3, taking care of business against their two AFC East rivals. But those rivals were not any good in 1980. The Jets went 4-12, and the Colts went 7-9. One of the obvious flaws of this stat is that it doesn't take into account future performance, as we know that the Jets in 1981 were actually a good team that made it to the playoffs, and wound up playing the Bills in a rematch in the wildcard round, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But if we're just going off of the 1980 winning percentage, you've got a combined record of 11-21, and a winning percentage of 34.4%. Getting out of the 30% range and into the 40% range, you've got the 1989 Browns, who had a point differential of plus 65, thanks to a 38-24 win over the Jets, and the game that's doing the heavy lifting here, a 51-0 demolition over the Steelers in Week 1 that might be the greatest Week 1 performance by any team ever. The Jets were 8-7-1 in 1988, but the Steelers had one of their worst years in the post-merger era, going 5-11, which comes out to a combined record of 13-18-1 and a winning percentage of 42.2%. In 2003, the Seahawks started 2-0 after beating the Saints 27-10 and the Cardinals 38-0. However, neither team made the playoffs the year before. The Saints went 9-7 and the Cardinals went 5-11, giving them a combined record of 14-18 and a winning percentage of 43.7%. And in 1970, the Detroit Lions actually set the post-merger era record for highest point differential through 2 weeks, as their differential was plus 75 after beating the Packers 40-0 and the Bengals 38-3. But when you combine a Packers team that went 8-6 and a Bengals team that went 4-9-1 the year before, you get a record of 12-15-1, and a winning percentage of 44.6%. We're halfway through the list, and the majority of this list consists of teams that beat up on teams that averaged out to a winning percentage well below 500. For the final 6 teams before we get to the Bills, they're at 500 or better, and some of these teams faced an opponent in there that made the playoffs the year before, although oddly enough, before the Bills, no team did this against 2 playoff teams. In 1995, the Dolphins had a point differential of plus 55, after beating the Jets 52-14 and the Patriots 20-3, beating up on their AFC East rivals. And while the Patriots made the playoffs with a 10-6 record, the Jets did not, and balanced them out with a 6-10 record. That gives you a combined 16-16 record, and a winning percentage of 50%. The most recent team to do this was the 2019 Patriots, who had a point differential of plus 73, after winning 33-3 against the Steelers and 43-0 against the Dolphins. Neither the Steelers nor the Dolphins made the playoffs in 2018, with the Steelers going 9-6-1, the Dolphins going 7-9, and the 2 teams combined going 16-15-1, winning 51.6% of their games. And in first place, you have a 4-way tie. The final 4 teams on the list all played opponents that had a combined record of 17-15. You had the 1980 Eagles, who had a point differential of plus 56, after beating the 10-6 Broncos by a final score of 27-6, and the 7-9 Minnesota Vikings by a final score of 42-7. You had the 1996 Packers, the eventual Super Bowl champion, who had a point differential of plus 57, after beating the 7-9 Tampa Bay Buccaneers by a final score of 34-3, and the 10-6 Philadelphia Eagles by a final score of 39-13. You had the 1997 Patriots, who had a point differential of plus 59, after beating the 8-8 San Diego Chargers by a final score of 41-7, and the 9-7 Indianapolis Colts by a final score of 31-6. And you had the 2001 Packers, once again finding themselves on the list, after beating 9-7 Detroit by a final score of 28-6, and 8-8 Washington by a final score of 37-0. All 4 teams tied at the top faced opponents who the previous year had a combined winning percentage of 53.1%. With that, here's the graph featuring all 13 undefeated teams with a point differential of at least plus 55 after 2 weeks, and the winning percentage of their opponents based on last season. Got that graph? Got that data looked at pretty good? Excellent. Because now, let's add the 2022 Bills into the mix. On opening night, they beat the defending Super Bowl champion Los Angeles Rams, the only team on the entire list not just to win the Super Bowl, and not just to make the Super Bowl, but make it to the conference championship. The Rams had a record of 12-5, making them one of only 2 opponents in this entire field to win more than 10 games in a single season. The other one? The Tennessee Titans, who the Bills beat in Week 2. The Titans got the number 1 seed in the AFC last season, making them the only opponent on this list to be a number 1 seed. Tennessee got that seed by finishing with a record of 12-5, same as the Rams. When you combine the Rams and the Titans, they won 24 games last season. Second place on the list combined won 17. And now, when we add them to the winning percentage, the Titans and the Rams, with a record of 24-10, won a grand total of 70.6% of their games in 2021. Not a single team had a point differential this high with opponents above 55%, let alone 60%, or 65%, or 70%. And here are the Bills, in their own zip code, blowing past the entire competition. It's one thing to beat up on opponents that aren't very good and that you're expected to beat. But to do this? No exaggeration, no hyperbole, no recency bias. What the 2022 Bills are doing right now is literally unprecedented, because we have never seen a team dominate through 2 weeks like this before. Not to this level, and not against this competition. Whatever Buffalo is doing right now is clearly working. The question isn't whether or not Buffalo is going to be any good this season, although to be fair, that was never the question. The question is just how good they can be. Just how dominant can this team be? Because somewhere at a desk in Bristol, Connecticut, Chris Berman is smiling. Because through the first 2 weeks of the season, no one has ever circled the wagons like the 2022 Buffalo Bills. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.